Have you ever imagined how a seemingly normal day could turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye? This was the grim reality for the Porter family on the 5th of December, 1989, when 12-year-old William Donnell Porter, fondly known as Donal, vanished into thin air in broad daylight, right on the streets of Harlem. Born in 1977, Donal was the youngest of 3 siblings, a beloved brother and son. Born in the Harlem section of New York. His mother, Velma Porter, a single mother and occasional heroin user, managed to keep the family afloat. She was determined to keep her children in school, despite the harsh realities that surrounded them. Richard Porter, Donal's older brother, was a figure of admiration for Donal. Born in 1965, Richard was known for his high-profile lifestyle and his flamboyant demeanor. He was a drug dealer from a young age, starting his career by selling cannabis joints at the age of 12 and moving on to a harder substance, heroin, by the age of 14. He would always buy his younger brother Donal clothes and trainers, keeping him looking fresh. His success in the drug trade was evident by his ownership of a 5 Series BMW at the age of 16, and his reputation for never wearing the same outfit twice. Porter began rising through the ranks of the drug trade in Harlem alongside his friends AZ Faison, Teddy Riley, Alpo Martinez, and his 2 best friends Vito and Lamont. He was convicted of drug possession in April 1984 and of weapons possession in November 1984. Rich would serve a little prison time for a shooting. He would be sentenced to 18 months and serve 12 months in jail. Once he got home, he would go back to the streets to continue where he left off. Rich was so successful with what he was doing, it got to the point where he could walk into a dealership and get a car a year before its release. Rich would have 3 children, Donal Whiten, Rashonia Porter, and Rhea Porter. Patricia, the middle child, was a year younger than Richard. Her younger brother Donal would be born a few years later in 1977. At 17, she had a child with AZ Faison, her first boyfriend, who survived being shot 9 times in a home robbery. Pat and AZ moved to Jersey, but would still spend a lot of time in Harlem at AZ's mother's house. In the heart of Harlem, in morning of December 5th in 1989, a nightmare unfolded. 12-year-old William Donnell Porter, a schoolboy, was kidnapped off the streets on his way to school shortly after leaving his home, setting off a series of events that would forever scar the Porter family and send shockwaves through the community. Velma, his mother, sensed something had gone wrong when Donal failed to return home from school. Velma would call around, asking if anyone had seen Donal, but no one had seen him. Her worst fears were confirmed when she received a call. On the other end of the line, her son's terrified cries echoed, followed by a chilling demand for a $500,000 ransom. Mrs. Porter said they could not afford the ransom. In an attempt to secure her brother's safe return, Pat Porter, Donal's sister, rushed to her mother's side. By the time she arrived, their brother, Richard Porter, would already be there. They would call back later that day, asking to speak with Rich. They would speak with Rich and decide to lower the ransom to $350,000 to have the child returned home safely. For 2 days, his abductors tried to extort as much as $350,000 from his 25-year-old brother, Rich. The family was given a horrifying proof from the kidnappers to show how serious they really was. On the second day, December 6th at 4 p.m., the kidnappers would call the family and tell them to go to a McDonald's restaurant at 125th Street and Broadway and look under the sink. By this time, the home of Velma would be filled with multiple people, including their uncle, Johnny Apple Porter. A friend of Rich would go to the location and find 2 rings there that belonged to Donal, a cassette tape and a 2-inch piece of an index finger left under the sink in a coffee cup. He would return to Rich with this coffee cup and decide what to do. Velma would actually say to the friend, "If you go and there is a piece of him, please don't let me know." They would then play the cassette tape. The contents of the tape were chilling. Donal pleading for his family to pay the ransom. Crying, he would say, "They cutted my finger off," Donal's voice said. "If you don't pay the money, they said they're going to cut off my hand. Please help me, get the money. I love you, Mummy." Their Uncle Apple was there and would tell them not to call the police yet. The kidnappers would call soon after, and Richard Porter would try to negotiate without the help of the police. The kidnappers said they would call back. Amidst the horrifying ordeal, family dynamics began to strain. a rift emerged between Richard and the rest of the family over involving the police. While Richard insisted on handling the situation without law enforcement, Pat ultimately decided to notify the authorities. The police would tell Velma not to answer the phone. During this time, the phone would ring numerous times. The police and later the FBI became involved, placing a tap on the Porter's phone in hopes of tracking the kidnappers. There was also a call from the kidnappers instructing Rich to go to a phone booth on 1024th and Broadway and wait for a call. He would go with his sister Pat and wait, but no one would call. The kidnappers remained elusive, their calls from various locations producing no leads. In desperation, Richard turned to his friend, Kevin Childs. Together they scoured the city day and night, attempting to amass the demanded ransom. A glimmer of hope came in the form of Fritz, a notorious drug lord, who offered Richard 30 keys of cocaine to sell and raise the funds. On December 10th, a final letter was delivered to Donal's aunt. The note said, "We still want the money. The boy is in pain and is in need of medical attention." This letter would then be given to the FBI as they were investigating this kidnapping. From that day forward, the family heard nothing more from the kidnappers. In the midst of this turmoil, Rich Porter, the eldest of the family and his crew, would be trying to figure out who took Donal and also trying to get all the money together. Rich would then meet up with Alpo on January 3rd for him to help move the bricks he just got from Fritz, but things wouldn't go right for Rich. In a cruel twist of fate, Alpo, supposed to be an ally, turned against Rich. A DC gangster by the name of Big Head Gary would be with Alpo and would be the one to shoot Rich in the head. Alpo would have to shoot him again in the head as Rich would start to move as they tried to discard his body. His life abruptly ended over the drugs he got from Fritz. Rich's body was discovered on January 4th, 1990, near Orchard Beach, Bronx. The police delivered the devastating news to Velma. Her initial relief at hearing they found her son quickly morphed into heart-wrenching agony as she realized they were speaking not of Donal, but of Rich. This would be a very tragic time for the Porter family, as Donal was still held by the kidnappers. Now the oldest brother Rich had turned up dead. A few years before, Pat was helping Azzy recover due to that fact he got shot 9 times along with 5 other people, where 3 would die and 3 would survive. And yet the tragedy for the Porters was not yet over. Donal, still in the clutches of his kidnappers, was ultimately found dead. It is not known exactly when he was murdered, but his body was found on January 28, 1990, off the Hutchinson River Parkway in the Bronx, less than a mile from where the body of his older brother Richard was found. The body of William Donnell Porter of 155th West 132nd Street in Manhattan was found on a bicycle path near the Parkway's City Island exit by a homeless man looking for cans. Donnell's body was inside 14 black plastic garbage bags, stuffed one inside the other. He was clothed in clean white sneakers, blue jeans, and a white shirt. The body was badly decomposed but not cut up or dismembered. In the aftermath of these events, the FBI's C-11 squad prioritized the apprehension of Donnell's murderers. The brutal nature of the crimes and their probable link to drugs made their investigation a top priority. Rich, known for his flamboyant personality, was loved by many. However, envy has a way of turning friends into foes. His success bred jealousy amongst those who knew him. There were many people that were jealous of him, some close to him, some not so close to him. It would soon come to light who killed Donal. Donal's maternal uncle, Johnny Apple Porter, who was a part of the preacher crew, was found to be responsible for Donal's kidnapping and murder. Apple was known as the favorite uncle. While he was incarcerated, Velma would go visit him with her kids, Pat, Rich, and Donal. They would visit him regularly. Apple would grow to dislike Rich simply based on the fact he was getting what he couldn't. He felt entitled based on the fact he was his uncle. He would talk to people bad about Rich, but never directly. Even with this, he never gave off the energy he was going to do what he would later decide to do. Apple had the idea to kidnap Donal because he was jealous of his older brother Richard Porter and wanted what Richard had. Donal was kidnapped by his Uncle Apple and taken back to a man who many feared, a man that went by the name Preacher. It would have been easy for Apple to take Donal due to the fact Donal would have trusted him enough to get into a car with him. The calls for the ransom would begin. Due to the fact Apple was around, He was seeing all the moves being played, so he knew when the police were involved, and he knew that the police were watching when told to go to that phone booth, which is why no one called or turned up. The note that came to the aunts was sent because Apple knew that Fritz had dropped bricks on Rich and thought this would be the best opportunity to let them know they still want the money and Donal is alive but in need of medical treatment. After Richard Porter was found deceased, they realized they wouldn't get the money, so they beat Donal to death and would dump his body on a bicycle path near the Parkway's City Island exit, close to where they found his brother Rich a few weeks prior. 1996. Apple and other Preacher crew members would get indicted. Due to the fact he was a heroin user, he would start to have withdrawals and cut a deal with feds to get less time. He would tell them about many crimes, including that of Donal. Johnny would even confess to Pat, his niece, Donal's sister, to kidnapping and killing her little brother Donal. His excuse was he only did it because Preacher was threatening to kill his son over money. This would be the last time Pat and Apple would ever talk to each other. There were rumors that Preacher didn't co-sign the kidnapping but went along with it, even though he lost respect towards Apple after this event due to the fact he's out there kidnapping his own family to extort his own nephews. Either way, Preacher was a vile individual. He had women raped, some killed, some would be both raped and murdered. He killed families and killed other rival gangsters he thought was a threat, or sometimes simply just based on what they had, such as nice jewelry, nice cars, good clothes. And eventually he snitched on all of his family. Apple would get released on parole in 2016. He would move to an unknown location, from a close-knit family living in Harlem to victims of a cruel game of extortion. The Porter family's life had taken a dark turn. Despite the family's efforts, the story of Donnell Porter's disappearance ended in tragedy. The mystery surrounding his vanishing act, the frantic search, the chilling ransom calls, the heartbreaking outcome. Remember, the mystery of Donnell Porter's disappearance is not just a story of a kidnapping. It's a story of a family torn apart. Their tale serves as a reminder of the harsh realities of life in the drug-infested streets of Harlem in the 1980s. And with that, we close the chapter on the harrowing tale of William Donnell Porter's disappearance. A story that even after all these years continues to captivate and confound us all. I would like to send my condolences to the Porter family and anyone that was affected by this event. Rest in peace to William Donnell Porter and Richard Porter. Thanks for watching. Until next time, like, comment, and subscribe. Also follow on Instagram @officialpageofcrime. Also on TikTok @pageofcrime